We're on, I think.
How was Minnesota Wilderness Camp?
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. We yeah, it was a good camp. It was nice to get back to it. Nice to be with kids again. And I don't know, just everything went well.
I bet all the kids are super happy about getting to it.
Yeah, it felt pretty rural this time because normally they have like the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, has like one spot up near um the mess hall or whatever that there's some Wi-Fi, but it didn't work this year.
Hmm.
So it was,
Out there.
yeah, I mean, we don't have electricity anyway in like the cabins and stuff. So, um, and we didn't have that much trouble with bugs this year. Usually bugs are like the mosquitoes are bad. We had trouble with bears this year. Yeah.
Like coming on into the cabins or what?
Like coming up into the camp area, ended up being three, and then the Rangers came out, and then there were two. So,
Ooh,
yeah,
dude.
but it was a little different experience.
Yeah. I've never seen it. Like every year at New Jersey camp, they always warn about bears because there's so much, there's the hunting, I guess, restrictions are so tight in New Jersey. The camp there, they always warn about bears, but I've never seen one.
Yeah, very good. All right, we got some folks on.
Let's do it.
Well, we've missed you. Sorry for the delay. I was out of service for a week. But we are going to get back into James, and we're going to be in chapter 3, looking at verses 1 through 12 today. And just a couple of reminders. You know, James is writing to folks who, as he described at the beginning, were scattered. They'd been dispersed from their homes for whatever reasons those were. And then he just talked a lot about the attitudes that Christians need to have when they find themselves in those difficult trials and situations, from counting it all joy when you encounter those trials, to asking for God's wisdom, to not being angry, being slow to anger, not blaming God, being receptive to what God's trying to teach, and not being self-deceived, practicing pure and undefiled religion, making sure you take care of those around you that are even less fortunate. If you consider yourself in a difficult situation, think about those around you that are even worse off. And then we talked about in chapter 2 about being careful not to be partial, not showing favoritism toward people of higher stature, or people that you think can do something for you. Anyway, lots of practical things in this book. So you want to add anything to that before we jump into 3?
No, not really, other than he James has sort of imagined a lot of things that we might say or not say, like backing it up into chapter 2, verse 14. What use if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Back it up to chapter 2 and verse 3 about the partiality thing. You might pay special attention to the one who is wearing the fine clothes and say, you sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor man, you sit over there. I think if you back it up into chapter 1, let no one say when he is tempted, I'm being tempted by God. So in all this challenge that we face from the outside, and then the responses we need to have, one thing that James has really been focused on is the way we talk. And a lot of that has sort of been, well, I guess it's 2 things. One, how our language impacts other people, but also how our language informs the way that we actually think. And we kind of guide ourselves whenever we talk. We're guiding our thoughts and our actions in our lives. And so he's going to really hit that pretty hard here in chapter 3, kind of near the centerpiece of the book. And this is one of the things that he said: if you really want to be devoted to God, you better make sure you treat people right, especially the disadvantaged. Keep yourself unstained from the world, and you got to get control of the way you talk. And so that's kind of been a motif all throughout the book already. And he's going to hit that pretty hard here in chapter 3.
Very good. If you've never done this in the book of James, it's it's kind of an interesting thing. Sometimes just go through and underline everything that has to do with our talk
Mhm.
from the very beginning of like, you need to ask God for
Yep.
wisdom. That's
Yep.
something you do with your mouth. But I think it was Wes Goss at one time told me to do that. And so I did it and saw all kinds of things I'd never seen before just by underlining all the times it says say or don't say or ask or talk like this. But like you said, this is the central piece of using our tongue the correct way here in chapter 3. So,
Yep.
all right, I'll read verses 1 through 12 and then we'll talk about it. Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. Now, if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Look at the ships also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also, the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire? And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body, and sets on fire the course of our life, and is set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea, is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come both blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be this way. Does a fountain send out from the same opening both fresh and bitter water? Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Nor can salt water produce fresh.
I was thinking while you're reading, this is the part of my life where I have to apologize the most frequently. And probably that means there's even more times where I need to confess to the Lord or apologize to my wife or my kids or my friends or people that I'm whatever. Like it's just it hits every time I read this section
Mhm.
how easy of a area of failing it is
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like you said, and James makes this point about if we can figure out how to tame what's in here, we can kind of figure out the whole body. I've not had to apologize to too many people for like slapping them or kicking them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I haven't been like, bang, oh man, sorry, I didn't mean for that to happen, or kick them in the shins. And like I'm pretty well in control of that kind of thing. I mean, maybe not when I was younger and had siblings or whatever, but
Sure.
yeah, I mean, almost on a daily basis, something I say, or maybe even something I don't say
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be said. Um, I let somebody down. I hurt somebody in some way. And that might be worth talking about too. How many times do we hurt each other sometimes because of what's not said
Sure.
when God has said specifically, even in this text, we're supposed to be giving blessings to people, but many people withhold those blessings and it's as hurtful as it is for them to be cursed.
That's a great point. And even the metaphors he uses, which I'm sure we'll talk more about in a minute, but like the horse metaphor, the ship metaphor, bridles aren't just to restrain horses. Sometimes they are to restrain horses, and we need to
Right.
restrain our tongue sometimes, but they're also meant to urge on a horse, and to
Yeah.
guide it into doing what it needs to do.
Right.
So I think that's absolutely right. Learning how to, I guess that kind of goes back to what we were talking about just a second ago. A lot of the book of James is teaching us about how to talk in our own minds and our own hearts, how to talk to other people, how to talk, in general, both to avoid bad, but also to do good with our tongues.
Yeah. Very good. So let's start with kind of verse 1 then. When James says, let not many of you become teachers. is he really trying to discourage Christians from being influential, from being teachers? Is this talking about just like some very specific public role within the church? What's he trying to discourage us from? Or
Yeah.
is this more of a, you know, I mean, what's he trying to accomplish? What do you think's going on here?
Right. Well, I think we can know from other scriptures that teachers are not bad, because Ephesians chapter 4, Romans chapter 12, 1 Corinthians 12, those things are described as gifts. And so that's good. I think even in the book of James, there's at least a hint, if not an outright explicit mention of teaching, because the very last exhortation he's going to give in the book is, if you see a sinner and you turn them from the error of their way, you save them from death. That's like the last thing he says. Okay, how do you do that without imparting information or perspectives to someone, which is teaching them? So I don't think we can read 3:1 as just hey, teachers are bad, whatever. I guess, I don't know. I think there's probably more to it. But for me, when you read the following verses, it's a strong warning of, hey, some of you may think you want to be teachers. You need to think about this pretty seriously before you do. Because here's how this thing can all get messed up. It's a gift. It's a good thing. You're saving somebody's life if you tell them the truth, give them perspective they need to be saved from sin and death. But if you're going to be somebody who's going to be talking to people a lot, you may be getting yourself in a lot of trouble, and you need to take that responsibility very seriously before you pursue that, and watch out for it. Like I said, I'm sure there's more to it than that that I don't always think about very much, but that's kind of, to me, how I read this warning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's been maybe even well-meaning people that have looked at this text and said, like, yeah, I'm just never going to attempt to talk to anybody about scripture. I'm not going to be a teacher within the church because James said, don't do it. And I do think that maybe ignores or misses the point of lots of other scripture, and even, like you said, things in James writing himself. Hebrews 5, when the Hebrew writer gets on people and saying, by this time you ought to be teachers, but you still need somebody to teach you. The whole point of us being Christians is to share things, to confess the Lord, to share, be the light, to help people understand what's true. So I really don't think James' point is, there only should be 2 or 3 teachers that exist in your church and everybody else keep their mouth shut.
Right.
When Jesus was in his ministry, teaching all of his apostles, training them to be teachers, none of them really were at first. They were just simple folks from different backgrounds, but he needed to teach them how to use their mouth and use their words. And there's a lot of times where he would rebuke them for things they would say, or a spirit that would come out in the way that they would speak. All the while, they kept hearing Jesus condemn the Pharisees who were in a teaching position for being blind guides who made people's lives worse. We talked a lot about this when we studied Matthew stuff. And so Jesus, spent a good number of years even with these guys, teaching them how to teach, counseling them about how to be counselors, while pointing out that there were lots of people in these roles that were harmful to other people. And James is wanting us to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah. And part of that condemnation that Jesus gave of the Pharisees in Matthew 23 is they loved being called teacher.
Mm-hmm.
They love that position. They love that power of being able to assert themselves and their dominance and sit in Moses' seat and all that sort of thing. And I think that kind of goes with some of what James is getting at here is it goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. Our speech isn't really for us. I mean, it is for us if it's something we use to benefit us in service to God, but we should think about our tongue as something that serves a grander purpose of God's purposes, like riding a horse. Well, if in the metaphor, our bodies are the horse, and the bridle is like our tongue that kind of dictates the direction of our bodies or our lives. Well, like horses, there's a rider on there guiding that thing. Mm-hmm. God needs to be the one guiding. if our lives or our bodies are like the ship and our tongues are like the rudder, well, there's a captain at the helm that should be guiding that to go somewhere, to do something. Even the fire metaphor that he gives, somebody starts the fire, and fire can be used for a lot of really productive things unless it's out of control and it's a destructive thing. And so the real danger for those who pursue teaching or being influential or whatever, or even if you don't even pursue it, you just happen to find yourself in it, that act of service can become something monstrous if we let it, and if we forget the whole purpose behind what we're doing, which is to elevate God's will, to bless other people, to build other people up, and not to assert our own power or dominance. That was the problem with the Pharisees. That was even the problem, I think it's Romans 2, where Paul talks about, hey, you guys, you Jews, think that you are the teacher of the ignorant. Well, they had like thought of themselves as, look how special and great we are, not how can we do God's will? How can we impart God's will to others? Just like he's done good for us, we want to do good for other people.
Yeah, very good. I like all these metaphors. I mean, you've hit on a couple of them, but even when we get to the end of where we read in verses like 11 and 12, he uses the idea of being either a fountain or a fig tree or a vine, you know. Both of those are about sustenance and nourishment. Like, again, you've made this parallel a few times, but James has a lot of parallel in the Proverbs.
Yeah.
And so much of the Proverbs talks about how our words can be soothing, can be nourishment, can be feeding people. So I do think you book in this whole section and he's saying, listen, if you're ever going to get into a place where you're thinking in terms of teaching others, remember what you're trying to do. It's supposed to be nourishment. It's supposed to be something that gives them life, not something that takes away from them. And you made a confession about day-to-day life. I'll tell you, growing up, this was my biggest spiritual challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I kind of, maybe that's just the way kids are or whatever, in any generation, but I especially had friends that we kind of like championed the idea of being the most witty when it came to the way we could hurt others or bring others down or tear them down with their words. I mean, I was a punk. I was. And I can only imagine like how many people I hurt that, maybe I hope it didn't affect them for very long. But I mean, we just used our words all the wrong ways for people.
Yeah. Sometimes people talk about certain temptations or sins that are unnatural. And I know like that's a legitimate thing to talk about and some things, but it seems to me that's kind of James's point, is that we need to realize we're behaving in an unnatural way whenever we say good things about God, but then we curse other people. Like trees don't do that. Trees don't produce one thing one day and then another thing the next day, or on one branch there's one thing, on another branch there's another. That's an unnatural thing that goes against the natural order that God has made. And if I want to say that I'm one of God's people, that I love God, I should, like, that shouldn't compute or make sense to me. I should recognize that that's totally messed up, and that's an unnatural way for me to speak, to bless God in one breath and to curse people in another. Maybe if I would realize that and think about it, I'd take it a lot more seriously, to work a lot harder to purge out and to clean out any of the destructive speech, any of the bad stuff that I say and do with my word.
So, in verse 2, when it says we all stumble in many ways, but if anyone doesn't stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. This bridle thing has come up a couple times now in the text.
Yeah.
Back in chapter 1, that was the word that was used to describe, in verse 26, bridling our tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So bridling our tongue, bridling our whole body, goes back to what you said. That means something else is in control of that thing. Well, what's in control of my tongue? Like, how do I learn not to stumble in what I say? It's not a matter of like biting my tongue or allowing all these ideas to like fester in here and then just before they come out, like stopping it before it comes out. That's sometimes what I need to do. But I think part of the implication is Christians need to be thinking deeper about where this is coming from,
Yeah.
the attitudes of our heart. Jesus talked about it wasn't went into a man that defiled him, but what came out of him.
Yeah.
And what came out of him was coming from the heart. So speech is really a heart issue. Um, and I've thought about, tried to think about, if I want to change it, what do I change? What are the actual things that need to go on? And I'm a big one on this. I think vocabulary matters. Like, what words are we going to use? Like, what's going to be our storehouse of words that we're going to choose to use? Vocabulary and vision, like what kind of words and what's the purpose of those words with the idea of, okay, I want to be a blessing. I want to build people up. I want to give them life. I want to be soothing if they're hurting. So being able to sort of see clearly and then have the right storehouse of like ways to say or things to say is part of how we begin that journey.
And when you say vision, are you thinking primarily about recognizing in the moment what needs to be said or not said, or more so like, hey, here's the end goal of, here's my vision for where I want my words to end up or what I want them to do?
Yeah. Wouldn't that be both? I mean, isn't that the idea of wisdom?
Yeah.
Wisdom is both the ability to see the end of a thing, the bigger picture, but it's also the ability to see in a moment what's the right thing to use in this moment. And so the Bible will talk about all of that we have our speech seasoned with salt, but why? The bigger picture of that is to make sure the end result of that is preservation and life and helpful things.
Sure.
But I wonder sometimes though, for people that really have struggled with their language and their words, not just their language in the sense of like maybe they use foul language, but just unhealthy, unwholesome, tear people down, don't build people up. Like, what needs to change to become somebody who doesn't stumble in this? And that's what I kind of always come back to is you just need to learn some new words. You need to learn some new words, and you need to think a little bit differently about the purpose of why God gave you words and your mouth and all of that.
I like that a lot. Yeah, like you were saying, the bridling thing is a pretty strong metaphor here. I mean, just the control aspect, the rudder thing in verse 4, the fire deal, well, fire getting out of control. You need to keep a fire under control so it doesn't destroy. Even verse 8, he uses the or 7 and 8, he uses the idea of taming wild animals. And hey, no one has ever tamed the tongue. It's a wild animal. It's a restless evil. So here's something that I know can be said sometimes. Someone say, well, I'm just being honest. Like I said that's what I think. So I don't want to be fake. I'm just being honest, So
just keeping it real, man. Just keep it real.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I were to not say what I thought about XYZ, or not just be honest about this thing that I feel or think, and even some people will be drawn to, hey, at least they're honest. Everybody else in that sphere, they're all fake and pretend. They just say what we want them to hear, but at least that person's honest. I like that. As if being out of control or saying things that are hateful and destructive is a good thing. But I get where it comes from, because I think people are like, it'd be hypocritical if I didn't just say what I think. I'd be pretending like I'm kind and gentle when I'm not really kind and gentle, or at least I don't feel that. I didn't think this thought. So what do you say to people that say that, where these mean, destructive, harsh words in the under the umbrella of transparency or honesty or genuineness? What do you think? What do you think is a good response to that, or a way to think about that?
Yeah, I think some of that is to check our motives. Like, who's that really for? Certainly there are times where Jesus would say things that were pretty straightforward and pretty hard to hear. He'd even use some vocabulary that you kind of are taken back by. Maybe here's something to think about too with this, and I'll get back to your question. When James in this text says, out of our mouth shouldn't come blessing and cursing.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how some people think of this though. Hey, well, we were told to be like God. And God gives both blessings and cursings. I mean, go back to Deuteronomy. There's evil in Gerizim. Jesus had blessings and woes. Can't we too? No, we
Right.
can't. We aren't God.
Yeah.
When we get to chapter 4 in James, he's going to say, there's like, you're not the judge. God put us in
It's
the
like the
world.
anger thing from chapter 1. Similar
Right.
kind of deal.
Right. God put us in the world to be blessers, not cursers. But we let ourselves off the hook sometimes with that by saying, like, well, we're just trying to be like God, tell the truth, be honest, be straightforward. I'll tell you what's going on most of the time when I'm like that, though. That's more for me than anything. That's
Exactly.
cathartic. I'm angry. It's a way for me to feel better. If I can hurt them or, whatever, then I get them back for whatever it is they made me feel. So that's some of what I would challenge is, are you certain that you even have a right to do this right now?
Yeah.
Are you really God here?
Yeah.
And who's this really for? Because most of the time when I've done it or when I've seen it done, it really isn't for the good of the other person.
Yeah.
And if it was, we would take them aside and do it. I try to keep that rule for myself. I will say some pretty hard things to people, but I only ever try to do it when it's one-on-one.
Yeah.
I try very hard not to do it publicly to humiliate them or to get other people on my side about it. I tried to do that with my own kids. I think that's a helpful thing that even Jesus taught about going to somebody one-on-one first.
Mhm.
So that might be a good rule, is if you feel like you need to tell somebody the truth and be hard about it, get them alone and see if that's still how you'll talk to them.
Yeah. And maybe to update that face to face, not via text message or a
Yeah.
DM or a post or whatever. Yeah. And I think there's something else too with this genuine thing, that mentality kind of indicates, hey, whatever impulsive thought or feeling I have in this moment, that's the truest thing about me. And so I have to just say that because that's just who I am. If I'm going to be genuine or honest or whatever. But actually, what should be the truest thing about us is our convictions about what's right and what's good, like putting other people's needs above our own. And so, yeah, I may impulsively feel this or think this about someone. It may be true, but I need to restrain that. I need to tame that. I mean, that's the thing about this text that's really valuable to me is James is saying, yes, you are like a wild animal. Your tongue is like a wild animal. Get control of that thing. Overrule that. Don't let your tongue rule it. Because if you don't, wild animals tear things apart. Ships with no rudders run aground. Fires that are not controlled burn down entire. I mean, you know better than like anybody would, being from California. Like, it burns down whole states and places, right? And sometimes that can be good, sometimes it can be really bad. And most, I mean, the really explicit statement he makes is it's set on fire by the course of hell itself. That's where this thing goes. If I don't learn to control my tongue to bless instead of to curse, to give instead of to take, then I'm setting myself up. I'm lighting the fires of hell in everybody's life around me, and I'm setting my life up on the course of hell. And that's the real warning here, I think.
Yeah, very good. Some people made some great comments on here too. Laura talked about, the idea of seeing people as God's creation. Like it says that right there in verse 9.
Yep.
We need to be careful about cursing anybody made in the likeness of God. And then Marianne Lohman mentioned the idea of even watching the way we react with our face and our body language and stuff like that. So much is said in that. I've been doing some reading lately on body language and understanding all of that. And it's crazy the percentage of what we get from body language compared to actually the words themselves. So yeah, Christians who want to be loving, who want to be blessings, who want to be influential, who want to be Christ-like, this is the battlefield right here, and James has all kinds of great ways of illustrating it, I think.
Yeah. And like we said, we're not done talking about the tongue. We're going to have lots more in the subsequent discussions throughout the rest of the book of James about how to talk and how not to talk.
Yep. Very good. We're out of time. Thanks everybody for paying attention, being with us, participating. I'll be in the wilderness again this Wednesday for a couple days. So
I will not be in the wilderness, but I also will not be available. So
yeah. So we'll see you guys next week sometime.
thanks, guys.